From the Cosgun Lab and the Bioengineering Media Lab at Georgia Tech, welcome to Lab Coat Conversations, where you too can join the discussion on the next academic breakthroughs. Join your host, Hector Torres, as we talk to Georgia Tech researchers. This episode, please welcome James Dahlman. So talking with you, Dr. Dahlman, can you tell us a little bit maybe about yourself and like the research you do, maybe some areas of interest?
Yeah, so my name is James Dahlman. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Biomedical Engineering at Georgia Tech and Emory. I've been here since 2016. I have a lab chock full of excellent students. Got about 20 people right now in the lab. And we're having a lot of fun. Our work focuses on mRNA therapeutics. Many of your listeners may be familiar with mRNA therapeutics because of the vaccines. So if you received a Moderna or Pfizer vaccine, that was an mRNA drug. The mRNA gets a lot of attention, deservedly so. But some of your listeners may not be familiar with the fact that they also got injected with lipid nanoparticles or LNPs. And that's what we work on is LNPs for mRNA therapeutics.
So have you worked with like other companies to help them facilitate these like mRNA therapeutics as well, or?
Yeah, so our work is very academic, of course, but we also have a real translational focus in the lab. Our science tends to be very translational, so we design these LNPs or lipid nanoparticles a certain way so they can be translational, literally down to the chemistry and the molecules that we choose. But in addition to that, we develop techniques that allow us to run a lot of experiments at once. That's what I think we're probably best known for, is this approach called DNA barcoding, which allows you to test how basically run a few hundred different experiments at one time. And these mRNA experiments are really expensive and really time consuming. So being able to run a few hundred at once is potentially really valuable. We've actually spun this stuff out into different companies. So my first company was called Guide Therapeutics. It was started by myself and Corey Sago, who was a student of mine, a BME PhD student at Georgia Tech and Emory. And that was acquired by a company called Beam Therapeutics, which is a gene editing company that uses a lot of mRNA. So our stuff has been, translated in the real world, both through a startup and then into sort of an adult company that bought our startup. There's a second company now that was started by Kalina Pavnoska and Curtis Dobrowski, two trainees from my lab. That company is called Nava Therapeutics, and that company is also developing mRNA-based drugs. So I'm proud to say that three Georgia Tech and Emory trainees, Corey, Kalina, and Curtis, are founders of biotechs that have all either done well in the case of Guide, or hope to do well in the future in the case of Nava.
Wow, that's very cool. So in terms of that, do you have like any advice for any students that may be like interested in doing something similar, like going from a research base to an entrepreneurship base, in a similar way?
Yeah, I certainly have a lot of advice through my experience at Guide. I would say that after we get through helping out Nava, I'll probably be in a better position to give advice. And after we do the third company, I'll probably be in a better position to give advice, and so on and so forth. So I won't pretend to be an expert now. I've only done one. But I will tell you that I know a lot more now than I did when I had zero. So the first piece of advice I'd say is like, just be ready to learn a lot really, really quickly. The skill sets and techniques and ways that you succeed in the biotech space are actually very, very different than the skill sets and techniques that you use in an academic laboratory. It is a very different part of your brain. The pressures are different. I think the highs are higher and the lows are lower. Everything is much more compressed. You have to succeed and do X, Y, Z in the next 6 months, or your company goes under. So there's a certain, it's a very different feel. So if you're thinking about going from a research lab into a startup, just go in eyes open. Go in knowing what you're getting into. It has pros, it has cons, like everything else. And just be honest with yourself that, I'm going to have to get on my horse and like really, really like put work in. I'm going to have to solve problems quickly that I have no expertise or background in. I'm going to have to lead people and communicate in a different way. And I'm going to have to do all this under immense pressure. But some people really like that. Some people hate it. And that's okay. Like, it's just a personal preference. That'd be my piece of advice. Just get ready for a ride. It's really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. While we're also on the topic of giving advice, you mentioned that, right, the advice you would give for an entrepreneurship type of deal is different from advice you would give to getting into a research at all, right?
Mhm.
Do you want to share what maybe that advice on the research side might be?
Yeah, and I don't know who will be listening to this, but if any of my students happen to be listening to this, then they can skip over the next 2 minutes because they've heard it already. I tell every student who joins my lab and every student who's thinking about joining my lab the same thing, which is that I actually have a very strong opinion about what makes a good academic lab for a given student. The first thing I'll say is that I don't believe at this level that there are people that are 2 standard deviations smarter than everybody else in the room. I think if you're in a PhD program at a place like Georgia Tech Emory or our peer institutions or other institutions that do really good research, you're already at a certain end of the bell curve just in terms of raw intellectual ability. So you have the engine. If you've been accepted into one of these programs, you have the engine. I therefore think that it's all about fit. And what I mean by that is when I was a graduate student, I went to the MIT Harvard Medical School HST program. And just like at Georgia Tech Emory, there were a lot of really good labs to choose from. So I could have done a lot of different things. I chose to get into RNA therapies because I really, really liked it. Like in my gut, I thought this is really cool. As a result, if you put me in any lab, we'll just say easy numbers with 100 people in it, and we're all doing RNA therapies, I may not be the best, but I'll probably be in the top 5 because I'm going to outcompete all the folks that don't actually like it. It's not because I'm any smarter. It's just because I think about this stuff all the time because I just think it's awesome. If you put me in a cancer biology lab, I'm probably in the bottom 5, not because I'm stupid, but because all the people who really like cancer biology are going to outcompete me. So for me, I think and I've seen this with our own students. We've had a few students that have had, like, I can't really overstate how quickly their careers have taken off. And those students, they love it. You knew from day one that they loved it. And so if you're a graduate student, I'd say, look at the lab, say, okay, do I really, like in my gut, like what they're doing? Because if not, it's hard to fake it for 5 years. You're going to get beat out by people who like it. 2, I'd say, okay, what's the lab vibe like? Maybe you're a very earnest, I'm very earnest. So maybe you're a very earnest person like me. And, like I struggle in social situations where everybody's really sarcastic, for example. I just have never been able to do it. So if you go into a social situation where everybody's super sarcastic and you're an earnest person, well, that might be a bit challenging for you, right? You're going to be a bit out of water. By contrast, if you're like a super sarcastic person, you got like a biting sense of humor, good on you. That's great. And you go into a lab full of people like me, you're going to be like, oh my God, are you serious? Like nobody can take a joke in this lab. So you just need to find the right fit from the day-to-day perspective as well. And then the third thing I'd say is, do you like the PI? Does the lab have a track record of having students succeed and do well? But the most important, I listed those in order on purpose. The most important by far is, do you really love what you're doing? If no, you're going to get beat out by people who do. You can't fake it. And then, and then it's fit of the lab and then the PI after that. Other than that, I don't think anything really matters. I got to be honest.
Wow. Yeah, that's very insightful. Thank you so much. Well, yeah, once again, like, thanks for talking with me. That's all the questions that I had. But where can people find you if they have more questions for you?
Yeah, if anybody has any questions for me, please reach out. I'm not the most responsive person over email these days. mRNA therapies have gotten very hot. And so we are working hard and a lot. So I'm not super responsive over email. But if you kind of email me 2 or 3 times, I might get to you. And then, of course, people are always free to stop by. Our lab is on the 6th floor of the HSRB2 building in Emory. And we always love to show people around or whatever. So, and thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come and
No,
talk.
it's no problem. No problem.